I didn't mean for them to see it. That's what I told myself as I stood in the Ashford's backyard, holding a paper plate that suddenly felt too light in my hands. The air smelled like charcoal and sweet barbecue sauce. Someone had just flipped a rack of ribs, and the smoke curled into the late afternoon sky. Laughter rose from the patio table, loud, polished laughter, the kind that sounds practiced, the Ashford kind. And then there was silence. Not all at once, just in pieces. One conversation fading. A fork pausing mid-air, a glass set down a little too carefully. I felt it before I understood it. The strap of my sundress had slipped slightly while I was reaching for the lemonade pitcher, just enough to expose the small hummingbird etched on my left shoulder blade. It was delicate, simple. Black ink with the faintest wash of blue in its wings. But to Willa Ashford it might as well have been a scarlet letter. "Oh my," she said. Her voice carried, soft, controlled, but sharp enough to slice through a room. I didn't turn right away. I already knew that tone. I had been learning it for 3 years. When I did turn, she was standing there with her iced tea in hand, her pearl bracelet catching the sun. Her lips were curved into that careful smile she wore at charity luncheons and church fundraisers. And, "Paige," she said gently, as if speaking to a child who'd tracked mud onto a white carpet. "Is that a tattoo?" The word dripped from her mouth. A few cousins shifted in their seats. Marcus, my husband, was at the grill. He looked over, confused, tongs still in his hand. "Yes," I said quietly. I didn't rush to cover it. Not this time. Willa took a slow sip of her tea. "How?" "Unfortunate." The silence thickened. "It's small," I added, my voice steadier than I felt. "It's for my sister." Willa's eyes flicked briefly over my shoulder, dismissive. Regardless of the reason. "Paige? Some things simply aren't appropriate for the Ashford name." There it was. The Ashford name. As if it were royalty. As if I had married into a crown. She set her glass down on the patio table and faced the rest of the family. "I suppose this is what happens when standards are relaxed." A few uncomfortable laughs fluttered through the air. No one met my eyes. My cheeks burned. Not from shame, from anger, from grief. But I didn't cry. Not there. Because that hummingbird wasn't rebellion. It was Tessa. My sister had loved hummingbirds. Said they were stubborn and fearless for something so small. She had been a firefighter, and 3 years ago she ran back into a burning apartment building to pull 2 children from a bedroom window. The roof collapsed before she could make it back out. I swallowed, feeling the familiar tightness in my chest. "It's not trashy," I said softly. Willa tilted her head. "Oh, sweetheart, of course it is." Marcus finally stepped forward. "Mom." But it wasn't strong. It wasn't an... Willa smiled again, smoothing the front of her linen blouse. "Some of us," she continued, "work very hard to maintain a certain image." Her eyes settled on me, "And some of us don't." And just like that, I wasn't Paige. I wasn't a wife. I wasn't a grieving sister. Minche. I was a stain. That night, I sat on the edge of our bed while Marcus showered. The house was quiet. The faint hum of the bathroom fan drifted through the hallway. My phone lay beside me, screen dark. I traced the hummingbird lightly with my fingertips. 3 years. 3 years of subtle comments. Of polite insults disguised as advice. "You'd look more refined with lighter hair, dear." Maybe avoid sleeveless dresses at the club. Some families value tradition. I had told myself she would warm up eventually. I had told myself it was generational. I had told myself it didn't matter. But tonight something in her tone felt different, deliberate, calculated. When Marcus came out of the bathroom, towel around his neck, he sighed. She didn't mean it like that. I looked up at him. He believed that. Or maybe he needed to. "She called me a disgrace," I said. "She said it wasn't appropriate," he corrected gently. I held his gaze. In front of everyone. He sat beside me. "You know how she is." Yes, I did. And that was the problem. I hadn't always felt small around Willa. When Marcus and I first started dating, she had been charming, polished, warm in that distant, careful way. She asked about my job, my family. When I told her about Tessa, she had simply nodded. That must have been difficult, she said. Difficult, as if grief were an inconvenient errand. The Ashfords were old money. Generations of attorneys, donors, board members. Their family photos lined the hallway in gilded frames, weddings at country clubs, portraits in tailored suits. I came from something different. My father ran a hardware store. My mother baked pies for church fundraisers. Our house smelled like cinnamon and motor oil. We were loud, messy, honest. Marcus loved that about me. Willa tolerated it. At least that's what I thought, until the comments began. Small at first, you're very spirited. Your family is quite lively. You have such a strong personality. Each word wrapped in silk but heavy as stone, and I smiled through it. Because I loved Marcus. Because I believed kindness would win. But standing in that backyard today, watching her eyes scan my shoulder like I'd committed a crime, I realized something. She wasn't waiting for me to fit in. She was waiting for me to break. Later that night, after Marcus fell asleep, I couldn't. The house felt too still. I walked to the living room and turned on the small lamp by the bookshelf. The soft amber light made the room feel warmer than I felt. My phone buzzed. A text from my elderly neighbor, Dottie. You okay, honey? Saw you come home early. Dottie lived next door. 78, sharp as a tack, and incapable of minding her own business in the best possible way. I smiled faintly. Just tired, I replied. There was a pause. Then, that woman of yours is something else. I stared at the screen. Dottie had been at the barbecue earlier. Willa had invited half the neighborhood for appearances' sake. I typed back, it's fine, but it wasn't. I set my phone down and leaned back against the couch. Set aside. For the first time in 3 years, I wasn't thinking about how to make Willa like me. I was thinking about why she hated me so much. And that question felt different, heavier, more dangerous, because people don't fight that hard to protect something unless they're afraid of losing it. And as I sat there in the quiet glow of that lamp, I couldn't shake the feeling that Willa Ashford was protecting something far more fragile than her reputation. The morning after the barbecue, I woke up with that strange, hollow feeling in my chest. Not sharp, not dramatic, just empty. Marcus was already dressed for work, tying his watch strap at the dresser. The sunlight filtered through our curtains in pale stripes across the bed. You okay? He asked without looking at me. I'm fine, I said automatically. It was the kind of fine that sits heavy in your mouth. He came over and kissed my forehead. Mom just worries about appearances. I watched him carefully. About appearances, I repeated. He nodded. You know how important the Foundation Gala is next month. She's under pressure, the Ashford Foundation Gala. Every year, Willa hosted a grand charity event at the country club. Photographers, donors, everyone dressed in satin and tuxedos. Image mattered. And suddenly, my hummingbird felt like a threat. I didn't embarrass anyone, I said quietly. I know, Marcus replied quickly, but maybe just be mindful. Mindful, I swallowed. Of my sister, I asked. He sighed. That's not what I meant, but neither of us finished the conversation, because finishing it would mean choosing sides. The days after that felt strange. Willa didn't call. She usually called Marcus twice a week. I could hear her voice through the speaker sometimes, crisp, measured, always asking about family updates. But this week, nothing. On Wednesday afternoon, Dottie knocked on my door carrying a small tin of oatmeal cookies. I made too many, she lied, pushing past me into the kitchen. She set the tin down and studied my face. You're holding something in, she said. Dottie had been married 3 times. Outlived 2 husbands and divorced the 3rd. She claimed it gave her advanced emotional eyesight. I'm just tired, I said. She crossed her arms. Honey, I saw that woman's face when she looked at your shoulder. I stayed quiet. Dottie lowered her voice. That wasn't about a tattoo. What do you mean? That was personal. Her words lingered long after she left. That night I replayed the barbecue in my head, Willa's tone. Her choice of words. Standards are relaxed. Maintain a certain image. It wasn't just about ink. It was about control. A few days later, I found myself at the Ashford house alone. Marcus had asked me to pick up some documents from his old bedroom, tax files he needed for work. The Ashford house was large but cold, high ceilings, polished floors, every room arranged like a magazine spread. I had always felt like a guest there. I climbed the staircase slowly, the wood creaking faintly beneath my feet. Marcus's childhood room was neat, preserved almost like a museum. Framed awards, debate trophies, a carefully made bed. I found the file box in his closet and gathered the papers. But as I turned to leave, something caught my eye. Across the hallway, Willa's office door was slightly open. I don't know why I paused. Maybe curiosity, maybe instinct. Inside, her office was immaculate. Mahogany desk, glass, front bookshelves, framed certificates. But on the corner shelf, half hidden behind a stack of leather-bound albums, I saw an older photo frame turned slightly inward. It looked out of place. I stepped closer. The photo inside wasn't recent. The colors were faded, edges slightly curled, and the woman in the picture, I blinked. It couldn't be. She looked younger, early 20s maybe, long dark hair instead of her current silver blonde bob, but it was her, Willa, except her arms were covered in tattoos, not small ones, full sleeves, bold designs, flowers, birds, intricate patterns. She was laughing in the photo, leaning against what looked like a motorcycle. Wearing ripped denim shorts and a sleeveless top, I felt my heart begin to pound. This wasn't a rebellious teenager phase. This was extensive, visible, defiant. I picked up the frame carefully. On the bottom corner, written in fading ink, Willa Sinclair, 1984. Sinclair. I had never heard that name before. The door creaked slightly behind me and I nearly dropped the frame, but it was just the house settling. I set it back exactly where it had been. Willa Sinclair. Why had she kept that? And why hide it? That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open. I typed the name slowly. Willa Sinclair. At first, nothing significant appeared, but then I narrowed the search by location, and something surfaced. An old newspaper archive. A small headline from 1986, local woman arrested after bar altercation. The article was grainy, barely legible, but there it was. Willa M. Sinclair, 23, was detained following a disturbance outside a downtown establishment. Witnesses reported. I stopped reading. My hands felt cold. I wasn't looking for dirt. I wasn't trying to destroy her. I just wanted to understand. Because the woman who stood in that backyard judging me had once stood somewhere very different, and she had erased it. The tattoos were gone now. Laser removal, likely. Expensive. The maiden name gone. Minor. The past buried beneath pearls and charity galas. I leaned back in my chair, heart racing. 3 years of criticism. 3 years of being made to feel less than. And all this time she had once been exactly what she despised. When Marcus came home, I closed the laptop. I wasn't ready to say anything yet. Not without knowing more, not without being sure, because this wasn't about revenge. This was about truth. And truth, when handled wrong, can burn everyone. Later that night, I texted Dottie, "Have you ever heard of the name Willa Sinclair?" 3 dots appeared almost immediately. Then, oh honey. My stomach tightened. "Come over tomorrow. I think I've got something you need to see." I lay awake long after Marcus fell asleep again. The ceiling fan hummed softly above us. My mind replayed that photo, her laughing face, her tattooed arm, the wild freedom in her posture. Why would someone go to such lengths to erase who they were, and why punish someone else for simply remembering? For the first time, I didn't feel small. I felt steady. Because secrets have weight, and I had just felt the edge of hers. The next morning, I walked to Dottie's house with a strange mix of dread and determination humming in my chest. The sky was pale gray, threatening rain. The kind of weather that makes everything feel suspended, like the world is holding its breath. Dottie opened the door before I could knock. "I was waiting," she said simply. Her house smelled like lavender and old books. The curtains were half drawn, casting the living room in soft filtered light. She didn't speak again until we were both seated at her small dining table. Then she reached into a drawer and pulled out a thick manila envelope. "You're not the first Ashford wife I've watched try to survive that woman," she said quietly. I blinked. There were others. "Girlfriends," she corrected. None made it down the aisle. My fingers tightened around my coffee mug. Dottie slid the envelope toward me. Inside were copies, old photographs, yellowed and creased. More of Willa Sinclair. In one, she stood outside a bar with a group of friends, arms raised, laughing wildly. Her tattoos were unmistakable. Full sleeves, a large piece across her collarbone, even ink along her ribs. In another, she was sitting on the hood of a car beside a man with long hair and a leather jacket. The caption on the back read, "Wild nights, no regrets." I swallowed. "This is real," I whispered. Dottie nodded. "I've lived on this street 40 years. I remember when she moved here after marrying Mr. Ashford. Did everyone know?" I asked. "Some of us did," Dottie replied carefully. "But money has a way of rewriting history." I flipped through the photos slowly. "How did she laser removal?" Dottie said. "Took years. Painful, expensive. I remember seeing the bandages on her arms one summer." I stared at the image of that younger Willa. There was no stiffness in her posture, no careful smile, no polished restraint. She looked free. "What happened?" I asked. Dottie sighed. "She fell in love with a wealthy law student, Thomas Ashford. His family wasn't thrilled about her reputation." Reputation. The word echoed. "She reinvented herself," Dottie continued. "New wardrobe, new last name, and erased everything else," I murmured. Dottie nodded. "She worked very hard to become Mrs. Willa Ashford." Silence settled between us. I felt something shift inside. Me, not triumph, not anger. Understanding. The woman who humiliated me wasn't just cruel. Terrified of being exposed. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in 3 years. I stopped trying to justify her behavior. Instead, I started documenting it. Every comment, every subtle jab, dates, context. Not to weaponize it, but to steady myself. When someone keeps telling you that you're too loud, too bold, too much, you start to question your own volume. I needed proof that I wasn't imagining it. 2 days later, Willa called. "Paige," she said briskly, "we're hosting a family dinner Sunday evening. I expect you both there." "Expect. I'll check with Marcus," I replied. There was a slight pause. "And Paige," she added. "Yes, perhaps something with sleeves." The line went dead. I stared at my phone. For the first time, her control didn't intimidate me. It revealed her. Sunday arrived quietly. I chose a soft blue dress, sleeveless. The hummingbird rested clearly against my skin. Marcus noticed immediately. "Are you sure?" he asked gently. "Yes," I said. He steadied me for a long moment. "Okay." The Ashford dining room was already set when we arrived. Crystal glasses. Candles flickering. Willa greeted us at the door with her usual air, kiss. Her eyes dropped briefly to my shoulder. I saw it, the flicker. Not disgust, fear. Dinner began politely enough. Conversations about work, investments, a cousin's engagement. Then, halfway through the main course, Willa set down her fork. "Paige," she said lightly, "have you reconsidered that little accessory?" The room stilled again. I placed my napkin neatly in my lap. "No," I replied calmly. She tilted her head. "It's just that certain choices reflect upbringing." There it was. A few relatives shifted uncomfortably. Marcus cleared his throat. "Mom, I'm only saying," Willa continued smoothly, "that some families prioritize refinement." I looked directly at her. "Did your family prioritize it?" I asked softly. The question hung in the air like a fragile ornament. "I beg your pardon. Before you were an Ashford," I continued evenly. A faint flush crept into her cheeks. Marcus glanced between us, confused. "I don't know what you're implying," Willa said, voice tightening. "I'm not implying anything," I replied. "I just think people change." Her hand trembled slightly as she reached for her wine glass. "Yes," she said coolly. They do. I held her gaze. And sometimes they forget who they used to be. The room felt smaller. She leaned forward, eyes flashing. Careful, Paige. The warning was quiet but unmistakable. But I wasn't shaking anymore. I am being careful, I said, because now I knew something she had spent decades trying to bury. And knowledge changes posture. That night, Marcus confronted me in our kitchen. "What was that about?" he asked. Confusion etched across his face. I hesitated. This wasn't just about exposing Willa. This was about protecting my marriage. "I saw something," I said carefully. "In her office." His brow furrowed. "What?" "A photo. Of her from before." He looked skeptical. "Before what?" "Before she was your mother as you know her." I told him part of it, not all. His face went pale. "That can't be right," he whispered. "It is," I said gently. He sat down slowly. "Yes." Silence stretched between us. "My whole life," he murmured. "I'm not trying to hurt you," I said softly. "I just won't be shamed for something she once was herself." Marcus rubbed his temples. "She's going to lose it if this comes out." I nodded. "I don't want to destroy her." "Then what do you want?" I thought about Tessa, about that burning building, about courage. I want her to stop. Later that night, my phone buzzed again. A message from an unknown number. Some pasts are better left buried. No name, no explanation. My pulse quickened. This wasn't coincidence anymore. Willa knew, or suspected, and for the first time in 3 years I realized something else. She wasn't just ashamed of her past. She was afraid of me. That message sat on my phone screen for a long time. Some pasts are better left buried. No punctuation. Just a warning. I didn't show Marcus right away. Not because I wanted secrets between us, but because I needed to understand the weight of what I was holding. The next morning, I went back to Dottie's house. She was in her garden, pruning roses with steady hands. "I got a message," I said without preamble. She didn't look surprised. "From her. I don't know. It was anonymous." Dottie snipped a stem and dropped it into her basket. "Fear makes people sloppy." I watched her carefully. "There's more, isn't there?" She hesitated for the first time since this began. Then she nodded slowly. "I didn't want to overwhelm you." My stomach tightened. She led me inside again and pulled out another folder, thinner this time. "These are public records," she said gently. "You can find them yourself if you search long enough." Inside were copies of court documents, not just the bar altercation. There was a second charge, petty theft, and a dismissed charge related to disorderly conduct, all under the name Wiza M. Sinclair. My hands trembled slightly. Not because of the crimes themselves, they were minor, youthful, reckless, but because of the hypocrisy. She reinvented herself completely, Dottie said. Married into money. Cut off old friends. Paid for reputation management. Reputation management, I repeated. Dottie nodded. Articles disappear when you have enough influence. I stared at the faded ink. The woman who said I embarrassed the Ashford name. She had once been arrested in front of a downtown bar, and no one in that dining room Sunday night knew, except me. That afternoon, I finally showed Marcus the message. He read it twice. "You think she sent this?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "But who else would care?" He paced the living room, running a hand through his hair. "This is insane." "No," I replied quietly. "It's revealing." He stopped and looked at me. "You're not planning to humiliate her, are you?" The question hurt. "Is that what you think of me?" He softened immediately. "No, she's still my mother." I nodded. "I know." Silence filled the room. "I don't want revenge," I said slowly. "I want the cruelty to stop." He sank onto the couch. "You don't know how she'll react." "I think I do." Because I had seen the crack in her composure. And when someone builds their life on polished marble, even a small crack feels catastrophic. The confrontation came sooner than I expected. 2 days later, Willa showed up at our house unannounced. She never did that. She always called first. Her knock. I opened the door. She stepped inside without waiting to be invited. "I won't tolerate games," she said calmly. Marcus appeared from the hallway. Mom, she ignored him. Did you go through my office? She asked me directly. There it was. No pretending. No polite tone. Yes, I said. Marcus inhaled sharply. Her jaw tightened. You had no right. I wasn't snooping, I replied evenly. I was picking up Marcus's files. The photo was visible. She studied my face. And what exactly do you think you saw? Your past. The word echoed in the quiet room. Marcus looked between us, pale. Mom, he whispered. Is it true? She turned to him, her composure slipping for the first time. That was decades ago, she snapped. Irrelevant. Were you arrested? He asked. Silence. Her eyes flickered. Yes, she said finally. Once. It was nothing. And the tattoos? I asked. Her gaze shot back to me. They were mistakes. Like mine? I asked. Her lips parted, but no words came. For a moment, I saw it clearly. Not arrogance, shame, raw and old and carefully buried. I worked very hard to become who I am, she said quietly. I wasn't born in. I earned it, and I respect that, I replied. But you don't get to punish me for not hiding where I come from. Marcus stepped forward. Mom, why didn't you ever tell me? She looked at him like he'd betrayed her. Because it wasn't relevant, she said sharply. It's over. It's over. Not when you use it to hurt my wife, he replied. The air shifted. Willa's face hardened. You think this girl understands what it takes to survive, she said, gesturing toward me. She flaunts recklessness. My sister died saving children, I said calmly. The room went still. This isn't reckless. It's remembrance. Her expression faltered. For the first time, she had no polished response. Marcus's voice trembled slightly. You've been cruel to her. I've been protective, Willa corrected. Of what? He demanded. She didn't answer. Because the truth was too fragile. She left abruptly after that. No dramatic exit, just a stiff turn of her heel. The door clicked shut behind her. Marcus stood there for a long time. I don't recognize her, he whispered. I walked over and took his hand. She's afraid. Of what? Of being seen. He looked at me then. Really looked at me. And you're going to expose her? It wasn't a question. I hesitated. I don't want to, I said honestly. But if she keeps attacking me, I won't stay silent. That night, another message arrived. You'll regret this. This time, I showed Marcus immediately. He stared at it, jaw tightening. She's crossing a line, he said. I nodded. Yes. And lines once crossed demand consequence. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was afraid, but because something inside me had finally settled into clarity. There is a moment, quiet and almost invisible, when you stop trying to be accepted and start deciding what you will tolerate. I reached that moment somewhere between midnight and dawn. Marcus was awake too. I could tell by the rhythm of his breathing. You're thinking, he murmured into the darkness. Yes. A pause. Ukender. Are we going to war? He asked softly. I turned toward him. No, I said. We're going to dinner. Willa called the next morning. Her voice was cool, perfectly measured. Family dinner this Friday, she said. Full attendance. Marcus glanced at me as I stood at the kitchen counter. We'll be there, he replied. She hesitated. I expect maturity from both of you. It was almost amusing. We'll bring it, I said loudly enough for her to hear. The line went quiet before she disconnected. That afternoon, Dottie came over again. I laid everything out on the dining table, copies of the photos, the court documents, printed screenshots of the anonymous messages. Dottie examined them carefully. You're not doing this out of spite, she said. No, I replied. I'm doing this because she won't stop. Dottie nodded slowly. Then you must be calm. No raised voices, no cruelty, just truth. I didn't want to humiliate her, I said again. Good, Dottie replied. Humiliation is what insecure people use. Dignity is what ends them. I let that sink in, because she was right. If I lashed out, I would become the reckless girl she wanted everyone to see. If I stayed calm, I would become the mirror she couldn't avoid. Friday evening arrived heavy and warm. The Ashford dining room glowed under soft chandelier light. The table was set with fine china, white with gold trim. Every relative seemed to have been summoned. Cousins, aunts, even Thomas Ashford, Willa's husband, sat at the head of the table, quiet and watchful. The tension was almost visible. I wore a simple cream dress, sleeveless. The hummingbird rested clearly against my skin. Willa's eyes found it immediately. She smiled, tight and thin. Dinner began with forced pleasantries, talk of investments, charity planning, the upcoming gala. Halfway through the main course, Willa cleared her throat. Before we move forward with gala preparations, she began smoothly. I think it's important that our family presents a unified image. There it was. I set my fork down gently. I agree, I said. Her gaze sharpened. Certain aesthetic choices, she continued, can reflect poorly on long-stay. I felt Marcus's hand brush against mine under the table. I squeezed it once, calm. Are you referring to me? I asked evenly. She didn't hesitate. Yes. The word echoed softly against crystal and porcelain. Thomas shifted slightly in his seat. Willa, he warned quietly. But we represent tradition, respectability, discipline, and I will not allow impulsive decisions to undermine decades of hard work. I inhaled slowly. Then I reached into my purse. The room grew still as I placed a small envelope on the table in front of me. I agree, I repeated. Image matters. Willa's eyes flicked to the envelope, and honesty matters more. I opened it carefully and slid out a single photograph. Not all of them. Just one. The clearest one. Willa Sinclair. Laughing. Tattooed. Free. I placed it gently on the polished wood between us. Silence, complete and suffocating. Thomas leaned forward first. What is this? He asked quietly. Willa didn't move. Her face drained of color. It's you, I said softly. Marcus inhaled sharply beside me. The cousin. This is absurd, Willa snapped suddenly. Where did you get that? I found it, I replied. In your office. Her hands trembled as she reached toward the photo but stopped halfway. Thomas picked it up. His brow furrowed. Willa, it was decades ago, she said quickly. Irrelevant. I met her gaze. Like my tattoo. The words were calm, measured, no accusation, just symmetry. Her composure cracked. You had no right, she hissed. I had every right to defend myself, I replied. The room felt smaller by the second. Marcus's voice was low. She stood abruptly. Yes, she snapped. It's true. I was young, I was foolish, and I worked very hard to rise above it. Thomas's expression shifted, something between shock and quiet disappointment. And you judged her for the same, he asked. Willa's eyes darted around the table. They are not the same, she insisted. How? I asked gently. She opened her mouth, closed it, because there was no difference, only timing. The room had never felt so silent. Every polished surface seemed to reflect the truth back at her. Marcus stood slowly. You humiliated my wife for honoring her sister. Willa's breathing grew uneven. You don't understand what it's like to claw your way into respectability, she said. Then you should understand her, I replied. Something snapped in her expression. She lunged toward me, not to strike but to grab the photograph. Marcus moved instantly, stepping between us. Mom, stop. Her hand froze mid-air. For a split second I saw it clearly. Not hatred, not superiority, fear, pure and exposed. She stepped back as if burned. The mask was gone, and everyone at that table had seen beneath it. No one moved for a long time after that. The chandelier hummed faintly above us, the tiny crystals trembling from the rush of air when Willa stepped back. Marcus was still standing in front of me. Protective, not aggressive, just steady. Thomas remained seated, the photograph in his hand. He studied it carefully, as if trying to reconcile two versions of the same woman. Is this why? He asked quietly. Willa's shoulders were rigid. Why what? Why you've been so severe. The word landed gently, but it carried weight. She didn't answer. Instead, she looked at me with something far more fragile than anger. You think you've won? She asked softly. There was no venom in it now, just exhaustion. I'm not trying to win, I said. I'm trying to live without being shamed for remembering someone I loved. A cousin cleared her throat awkwardly. An aunt shifted in her chair. The room felt like a stage where everyone had forgotten their lines. Thomas set the photo down carefully on the table. You never told me about the arrests, he said. It was 30 years ago, she snapped, though her voice trembled. It was minor. Minor enough to hide, he asked. That question seemed to take the last of her balance. You don't understand, she said, her composure unraveling. Your family would never have accepted me. I had to change. And now you demand the same of her, Marcus said. She looked at him then, really looked at him. My whole life has been about protecting you, she whispered. From what? He asked gently. From embarrassment. The word echoed in the silent dining room. I felt something soften in my chest, because suddenly, I saw it clearly. She hadn't been protecting reputation. She had been protecting her own shame. And shame is a heavy thing to carry alone. But that didn't excuse cruelty. I never asked you to defend me, I said quietly. I only asked you not to hurt me. Her breath hitched. For a brief moment, I thought she might apologize, but pride is stubborn. Instead, she straightened her posture. This dinner is over, she announced coldly. No one argued. Chairs scraped softly against the floor as relatives stood and gathered their things. No one looked at her the same way. And that was the real consequence. Not scandal, not gossip, exposure. Truth has a way of altering how people see you, even if they don't speak it aloud. The next morning, the ripple effect began. A cousin texted Marcus. We had no idea. An aunt called to check in. Thomas didn't speak to Willa at all. And the Ashford Foundation Committee. Word travels quietly in circles like that. Not loudly, not publicly, but quietly enough to shift power. Marcus sat across from me at the kitchen table, phone in hand. They're postponing her speech at the gala, he said. I closed my eyes briefly. I didn't want that, I know, he replied. And I meant it. I hadn't wanted her humiliated. I wanted her to stop humiliating me. But once truth is released, you don't get to control how it lands. 3 days passed before she contacted us again. Not a call, not a demand. A simple text, we need to talk. Marcus looked at me carefully. Do you want to? I thought about the barbecue, about her voice calling me trashy, about the message threatening regret, and then I thought about a woman in that old photograph. Young, defiant, alive. Yes, I said, but on our terms. We didn't go to her house. She came to ours. When she stepped into our living room, she looked smaller somehow. Still impeccably dressed, still polished, but diminished. She sat stiffly on the couch. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then she exhaled. I was cruel, she said quietly. The words sounded foreign. Marcus's jaw tightened. Yes, he replied. She didn't argue. I spent years erasing who I used to be, she continued. Every mark, every mistake. Her eyes flicked briefly to my shoulder, and seeing that tattoo, it felt like watching my own past walk into the room. I listened carefully. That's not my burden to carry, I said gently. I know, she replied. And for the first time there were no sharp edges in her voice. Just fatigue. I was afraid, she admitted. Afraid that if people remembered who I was, they'd see me as unworthy. And instead, Marcus said softly, you made her feel unworthy. The truth settled between us, heavy, unavoidable. She looked at me then. Not above me, not through me, at me. I'm sorry, she said. Not polished, not rehearsed. Simple. I held her gaze. I don't need perfection, I replied. I need respect, she nodded slowly. And boundaries, Marcus added firmly. Yes, she agreed. It wasn't a magical transformation. There were no tears, no dramatic embraces, just 3 adults sitting in a quiet room acknowledging damage, and that felt real. After she left, Marcus sat beside me on the couch. I should have stood up sooner, he said. You did, I replied softly. When it mattered, he touched the hummingbird gently. I see it differently now. So do I said, because it was no longer something to hide or defend. It was a symbol of courage, not just Tessa's, Mine. In the weeks that followed, things shifted slowly. Willa stepped back from the gala committee for personal reasons. Thomas attended fewer social events. Family dinners became smaller, simpler. And when someone once joked lightly about rebellious youth, Willa didn't laugh. She stayed quiet, and that quiet was honest. Healing doesn't arrive like a parade. It arrives like morning light, slow, quiet, almost unnoticed until you realize the room isn't dark anymore. The weeks after that dinner felt different. Not perfect, but honest. Willa kept her distance at first. No sudden invitations, no pointed remarks disguised as advice. When she did call Marcus, her voice was softer, less sharp around the edges. And when she spoke to me, she chose her words carefully. The first real test came a month later. The Ashford Foundation Gala went forward as planned, but Willa declined to give her traditional keynote speech. Thomas stepped in instead. I hadn't planned on attending. Part of me didn't want to stand in that ballroom beneath chandeliers and polite applause, but Marcus squeezed my hand the morning of the event. "We go together," he said, "as we are." So I wore a deep emerald gown, sleeveless. The hummingbird rested proudly against my shoulder. When we entered the ballroom, I felt the familiar flutter in my chest. Conversations paused, then resumed. A few curious glances lingered, but no one whispered. No one pointed. And Willa, she approached us slowly. Her gown was silver, understated, elegant. She looked at me for a moment, at the tattoo, and then met my eyes. "You look lovely," she said. It wasn't exaggerated. It wasn't forced. It was simply said, "Thank you," I replied. And that was enough. Later that evening, I stepped outside onto the terrace for air. The night was cool, the sky deep and clear. For a moment, I let myself think of Tessa, of her laugh, of the way she used to toss her hair over her shoulder when she was teasing me. "You're too serious, Paige," she'd say. Maybe I had been. But grief ages you in ways people don't see. Marcus joined me, slipping his arm around my waist. "You okay?" he asked. "Yes," I said honestly. Because I was, not because the past had disappeared, but because it no longer owned the present. Over the next few months, boundaries became visible. When Willa made a comment that edged toward criticism, Marcus would gently redirect the conversation. When invitations came with unspoken expectations, we clarified them openly. And slowly, something else happened. Willa began sharing, not publicly, not dramatically. But one afternoon when I was alone with her in her kitchen, she surprised me. She reached for a glass of water and said quietly, "The collarbone piece hurt the most." I looked up. "The tattoo," she clarified. I didn't speak. "I was 19, she continued. "Thought I was invincible." There was no defensiveness in her tone. Just memory. "What made you remove them?" I asked gently. She paused. "Fear," she admitted. "And ambition." I nodded. "I understand ambition," I said. She looked at me carefully. "But I don't understand cruelty." Her eyes softened. It wasn't an excuse. It was acknowledgement. And sometimes that's where healing begins. Marcus and I grew stronger through it all. There's something powerful about watching your partner choose truth over comfort. He had spent his whole life believing in the polished version of his mother. Seeing her fully, flaws and all, was painful. But it also freed him. "I love her," he told me one night. "But I don't idolize her anymore." "That's healthy," I said. "And I'm proud of you," he added. "For what?" "For not becoming what she tried to make you feel." His words settled deep, because that had been the real battle. Not exposing her past, but protecting my own sense of self. One Sunday afternoon, I visited my parents. My mother noticed the hummingbird immediately as she hugged me. "You're wearing it openly now," she said with a gentle smile. "Yes," she touched it lightly. "Tessa would have loved that." I smiled through the familiar ache. I think she does. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one I'd grown up at. The scent of cinnamon drifted from the oven, and I realized something important. I had spent 3 years trying to prove I belonged in the Ashford world, but I had always belonged in my own. And that was enough. Willa's apology didn't erase the past. There were still moments of tension, still habits she had to unlearn, but respect replaced contempt, and that changed everything. One evening, months later, she handed me a small velvet box. Inside was a delicate gold bracelet. It's engraved. I turned it over. On the inside were tiny words partage, for courage. I looked at her. She didn't smile widely. She didn't dramatize it. But there was sincerity there. Thank you, I said. It wasn't forgiveness wrapped in ribbon, but it was growth. I still think about that barbecue sometimes, about the silence, about the heat rising to my cheeks, about the way humiliation can feel like shrinking. But I don't feel small anymore when I remember it, because that day wasn't the moment I was exposed. It was the moment she was, and in that exposure, something honest began. There's something I've learned through all of this. The loudest judgment often comes from the deepest shame. For 3 years, I thought I was being measured against some impossible Ashford standard, some polished ideal I could never reach. I thought if I dressed differently, spoke softer, tried harder, maybe I would finally be enough. But I was never the problem. I was just visible. And visibility is frightening to people who've spent their lives hiding. That hummingbird on my shoulder is still small, still simple. It hasn't changed, but I have. I don't adjust my sleeves anymore. I don't shrink my laugh at family dinners. And when someone looks at it with curiosity, I tell them about my sister Tessa, the bravest person I've ever known. I tell them she ran toward flames when others ran away. I tell them courage doesn't always look polished. Sometimes it looks like ink on skin. Sometimes it looks like telling the truth calmly at a dinner table where everyone expects you to stay quiet. Will and I will never be best friends, and that's okay. We exist now with something healthier than forced affection. We exist with boundaries, with honesty, with earned respect, and I've realized something else too. You can love someone and still refuse to let them diminish you. You can protect your marriage without sacrificing yourself. You can honor your past without apologizing for it. So I want to ask you something. Have you ever made yourself smaller just to keep someone else comfortable? Have you ever hidden a part of your story because someone told you it didn't fit their image? If you have, I hope you remember this. The people who judge you most harshly are often fighting ghosts you can't see, and you are not responsible for carrying their shame. You are only responsible for living your truth with dignity. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever faced quiet cruelty and found the strength to stand tall anyway, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Would you have done what I did? Tell me in the comments. And if you believe in choosing courage over silence, stay with me for the next story. Because sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is simply refuse to shrink.